Come on in.
All right, guys, welcome back to, I don't even know what number we're on now. Is it number 9?
I think, maybe.
Episode number 9, the Southern U podcast. We are tasked with the mission of educating those who are interested in all things related to land here in the Southeast. My name's Taylor McMurtry. I'm also joined by the man, the myth, the AL Deer legend,
Yes,
Matt Brock.
Guys, y'all got to cut that out.
Nope.
No, it ends today. It ends today. I'm Matt Brock. All that AL Deer crap's got to go.
We're going to take a poll online.
No,
Who wants us
I
to
don't
keep
give a
it?
flip what people think. It's just Matt Brock.
Give the people what they want, Matt.
I don't know that they want that.
Oh, me. And then also Mr. Jeremy Ferguson, Mr.
I got no claim to fame.
I mean, he's a real estate aficionado, wildlife biologist, all around joker. I don't know.
Something.
Something.
I'm
Definitely
something.
something.
Yeah, something. So today is a special episode. We are not live. Obviously, we're going to produce this release it at a later date, but we are back in the killing cabin. That's good news. The bad news is nothing's being killed today, though. We are not hunting today. We made the drive over here to meet Matt, kind of get this episode cranked out before we head on up to NWTF here in a few weeks. We're pretty excited about that, right, fellas?
Oh, yeah.
It'll be my first time up there.
I've never been.
I've been to ATA
Oh, boy.
stuff, but I've never been to NWTF. And it's a lot closer. It's in Nashville.
Yeah.
So if you're in the Nashville area or in the Southeast, come hang out. We'll be there and may do a show or two, and who knows what all kind of mischief we'll get into.
It's a good show. We're going to really test Taylor's limits on his production and editing because the sheer number of turkey calls that will be in the background is mind-blowing.
I didn't even think about that, y'all.
Yeah. Hey, at least it's not geese and ducks.
That's a fact.
That's true. Yeah, I didn't think about that. So, yeah, we'll all have a nice learning experience. I was trying to think before we jumped in the episode, any updates? I know that we talked about on the last episode the Instagram giveaway, and that is still absolutely going to happen. We are just waiting until we get the bow in our possession before we start promoting it. We just wanted to make sure, it's a brand new item. We don't have one. None of us personally have one to shoot yet, so you're going to get a bow. Whoever wins this contest is going to get one before we do. Yeah, and so if you didn't get a chance to check out the last episode, we are going to do an Instagram giveaway for a Darton Sequel 33 bow. It is kind of the next in line for the Prelude 32, which Jeremy shot this past season. It's a great bow, and so obviously haven't had one in our hands to actually put it through the ringer yet. But if it's anything like the Prelude, you guys are going to be in for a real treat.
No, it's awesome.
Whoever wins, because you kind of get the best blend of all aspects. You get speed and forgiveness and accuracy, and it's just
one of the easiest shooting bows I've ever owned.
Yeah. I mean, I set Jeremy's bow up, and literally 3 shots, it was perfect bare shaft bullet hole. Like 3 shots is all the adjustment it took. So,
and it is cooking with a 470 grain.
Yep, 470 grain arrow. The only thing I don't have in my shop is a chronograph. I've got pretty much everything else that anybody would need to set up and tune bows with, and I would really like to know, just curiosity, I'd like to know how fast that arrow is moving, because it is cooking. Absolutely. But just stay tuned for that. Like I said, we should get the bow here in a couple weeks, and like I said, you follow us on social, you'll know all about it as soon as we can release details. So, but today is a special episode. This is something we put out a couple weeks ago, maybe last week, on some of our social channels, and asked you guys for your requests. So this is going to be a viewer/listener request episode. And just so you know, as always, these guys have not been teed up at all. They have not. They don't know what we're going to talk about.
Nope.
And this is not really this episode doesn't have a theme like our other ones tend to. So all of these questions that have come in from you guys are just kind of all over the place. Some of them are habitat related. Some of them are more specifically about whitetails or about harvest, about all kind of stuff. So we are, like I said, pretty excited to kind of jump in and answer the questions that you guys seem to be most interested in.
Matt and I are scared.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
are.
I don't
Being
like
blind.
this. I don't like this at all.
Being blind is tough on us. But you get honest reaction.
You do, and that's what I think people appreciate, honestly. So I guess you guys ready? Got anything else you want to add? Can't take away from, but add to?
I'm good.
Ready?
No, I don't think so.
Let's jump in head first.
All right. So the very first one from the listener request. This question says, what effect do ATVs/vehicles have on deer even if you never get out? Now, we're going to have to sort of project some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming what this person meant when they asked the question was, even if I don't get out of my vehicle, if I'm just passing through the property and continuing on my way, what effect does that have? I'm assuming. Now, I could be totally wrong on that, but that's kind of my thought is.
And that's a good question.
Yeah.
We get a lot of questions like that.
So
and
I'm interested to see what you have to say.
fortunately, I think it's a pretty easy answer.
yeah.
It depends on what you do consistently. If you're on an ATV or you're riding through a property in your pickup and you're doing it consistently, I don't think it bothers the deer. But if it's new to them, I think it bothers the heck out of them.
Mm-hmm. I've seen properties where about the only time they ever used an ATV was to go to and from their food plots or their shooting houses. And in that case, the deer associated that activity with danger, a threat.
Pressure.
Right, because every time I hear that, I smell somebody or see somebody on the edge of this field. And it also depends on how often it takes place. Deer get really accustomed to motorized vehicles.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And especially if you're feeding from them. If you're feeding off of an ATV, UTV, truck,
Absolutely.
they hear that and they know it.
Hey, and it don't take long.
No.
Baiting's only been legal here, 3 years? Before that, we had the 100 yards out of line of sight. But, over there where I hunt on the lease that I've got myself, you can drive in there, and we're not in there all the time, but we're going in there filling feeders within a few minutes. On the cameras, when I go fill a feeder, I've got a deer standing there at the feeder and trying to figure out if there's corn on the ground or feed on the ground that they can get to within minutes, generally speaking.
I was going to say the same thing, and I may have even responded. I feel like I did on comments in one of the reels that we posted. Someone asked about it, like, hey, man, how do I explain this to my dad? That this causes a problem. And it can cause a problem. Like you said, if they're not used to it, it can definitely be a problem. But I've seen it be almost the total opposite end of the spectrum, where if every single time they hear that vehicle or that ATV, whatever, fire up, then they know that you're filling a feeder up. It's almost like ringing a dinner bell. Because same deal, like we'll have deer, a particular property in Jackson County that I used to get to hunt. The owner of the place up there, he would always take a side-by-side up to fill feeders. And literally, you could like still see tail lights in the frame of some of his trail cameras before deer were stepping out there wanting to see if there was something to eat. And it's just like, what are they used to? If they're used to it, then they'll check it out. I think that's pretty straightforward. That might be the easiest.
Yeah, I mean, if of course it's hard to do if you don't live on the property or close by. If I knew that I was going to be riding ATVs and whatnot to shooting houses because of limited mobility or something like that, I would make a concerted effort to be on that property consistently with a truck or an ATV. Yep. So those deer were acclimated to that, and it wasn't something that just started 2 weeks ahead of bow season and goes through, unfortunately, February the 10th.
Sore subject, guys.
Yeah.
Very.
And then stops, because it's.
I have seen it. I've seen it shut activity down if you have a property and you never show up on an ATV, UTV vehicle, and all of a sudden people rush in there the week before season starts and they're hanging stands and they're doing this and they're scouting, and then they rush back the next weekend to hunt. Deer activity goes down because they're not used to that.
Sure.
But if you're on the property working and doing things throughout the year, it doesn't seem to make much difference.
I think even some of you guys that have been hitting us up about public land type stuff, I mean, that's kind of something to take away from that question there. Even on public land, you would be surprised at how close you can hunt to the road and still have success, because the deer, they're just used to it. You know, you don't necessarily I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't use your own judgment and be a woodsman, but you don't necessarily have to go hike 5 miles deep to kill something. You know, you can have an opportunity to harvest stuff very close to public roads, you know, to transportation stuff.
And I've worked with some folks in the past that, you know, they were there in their trucks a lot, but they wanted to go in ATVs during hunting season. Guys, those things sound a lot different.
Yeah.
That ATV different sound, you know, it rings out through the woods for hundreds of yards. When a pickup's easing down the road, if it's not, you know, don't have loud exhaust or something like that, they're relatively quiet. I had much rather be in a club or in a setting where we were able to drive pickups around and not side-by-sides or four-wheelers.
And one property that I hunt, we use Easy-Go carts.
That's even better.
They're silent. So.
Yep. Creeping along. That might be the easiest answer that we have, or easiest question that we have so far.
Great. So they get harder from here.
They could. I'm not saying they do. I'm just saying they could. It's kind of like if you guys watch Hot Ones, they go progressively through the hot wings, you know, and they get worse and worse. It could be like that. Who knows? Second question here says, oh, this is a good one. I like this one. What is the proper buck to doe ratio on a piece of land? Yeah, that's a good one.
What's proper or what's realistic?
There you go.
There you go. Well, I mean, I know what I would say here. I'm no biologist. I'm just a bumpkin, you know, guy from Marshall County that doesn't know what a deer looks like. But I'm gonna let y'all do it first, and then I'll give you mine. But
that's gonna be goal oriented.
It really is.
Yeah. So it depends on what you're looking for. Ideally, you know, if I'm looking and it's not necessarily a trophy managed place, or especially an enclosed situation, I would prefer to have 2.5 to 3 does per buck. I don't want the rut so intense that I'm having more mortality from bucks fighting than I have to. You're going to have that, but that, you know, once you have bucks competing more and more and harder, that interspecific mortality rate is going to go higher, and you're already losing bucks to other things, you know, hunting mortality, occasional predation and cars and everything else. So I'd rather have a few more does than bucks.
Let's hear from Mr. Brock here.
Well,
I'm curious.
I've hunted properties with a wide array of you know, sex ratios. The most intense and enjoyable to hunt to me are the ones with about as near a 1-to-1 as you can get, at least during the breeding season. In order to achieve that, it really depends on what kind of habitat you have. You can support high numbers of deer and still have a relatively balanced ratio on good soil fertility and great habitat. If you don't have that, however, you've got to be pretty aggressive on your harvest, especially your doe harvest. But, you know, I'm realistically in most of the areas that we hunt, you're going to be looking at 1 to 2 or 1 to 3.
1 buck per 3 does.
Yeah, 1 buck per 3 does.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's like, and again, I think I would probably pull from what both of you guys have said. I think it's goal oriented. It's also what habitat you have, because what you may want may not be achievable, right? Like
right.
It may not be,
you've got to be realistic with what you're dealt with.
Right. And, you know, I had a professor at Jacksonville used to say it all the time. Hey, you can only play the hand you've been dealt.
That's right.
Period. You know, it doesn't really matter about anything else. But I would say, like, if you're trying to put down mature bucks, you're probably wanting as close to 1-to-1 as you can get, because odds are, statistically, well, what does that mean? It means that if this doe is hot, odds are she runs by you, she's bringing a buck with her, you know, probably. But now, from a harvest perspective, that might be awesome, because you get your eyes on, or get an opportunity at lots of bucks. But is that the best for the deer herd? Or is that rut, like you were saying, does that make the rut so intense and so
no? So the best scenario in the wild is a 1-to-1 ratio, because you have a short, intense breeding season that is one and done. It's over in a short window. When you have 2, 3, 4, 5, and in some places you may have 6 or more does per buck, they're not all going to get bred that first cycle.
Right.
So there's more competition. It gets drawn out.
Period.
It's a very long period. And like on this property right here, we've already got bucks that are grouping back up together. They look healthy. They're doing great. And 20 miles down the road, sex ratios are out of whack, and they're still hammering, chasing after does, fighting each other, getting run down even more, losing more weight. You don't want your bucks to go through that stress. There's a lot of social stress that comes along with a high deer density, and especially an out of whack sex ratio.
Gotcha.
And that can lead to it's hard for people to understand this, and they don't, no matter how much you try to explain it to them. People have argued with me till they're blue in the face, and I might have got blue a time or two. But when you add that additional social stress to the herd, you have lower recruitment rates with a higher deer density than if you knocked that density back and got that sex ratio back in check. You have healthier deer producing more fawns, and they're producing them in a tight window. One of the reasons that coyote depredation is so bad in the South is because we have a long breeding season, a long breeding window. So fawns start dropping, and they continue to drop for 45 days, 60 days in some cases.
That's a good point. Yeah.
If they all drop within a 10 to 20-day period, guess what? You're not going to lose as many because it takes a while for those coyotes to catch up.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. I've never thought about that before. But yeah, so because, and I've had a lot of people on Instagram go, whenever we were talking about Southern Rut, like what brings does into estrus every year, they're kind of hardwired to do that at the same time on the same schedule, no matter what. And boy, some of you guys got fired up about that, by the way.
Well, they can think what they want to.
No,
they're
just wrong.
Yeah,
right, it's fine. It's no big deal. It's just,
yeah.
But people are like, well, explain why I see spotted does in October, and spotted fawns in October, and I see spotted fawns in January.
You got a 6-month breed.
That's it.
Right.
You've got,
exactly.
You've got these does that are the ratio is so skewed one way, they're not getting bred.
Keep this in mind too. Some of those people jumped on those opportunities like, well, he said this, it's the gospel. No, we said that average breeding peaks at a certain time. That does not mean at all that breeding is not taking place before or after that.
Right.
And I think that's how some people interpreted what we said. That's not what we said.
Right.
So, you have your peak breeding, and in a balanced herd, most of your does will come in during that 10 to 14-day window. And if it gets unbalanced and you got a sex ratio skewed heavily toward females, then you're going to have deer coming in later and later and later, and you have a mess. You have spotted fawns all the way through season.
Right.
And see, I'm a little this is where Matt and I actually disagree a little bit, which doesn't happen a ton, but it does happen. I don't technically want a 1-to-1. Like I said, I prefer a 1-to-2, maybe a little bit better, and that comes from the captive side of my career, which is much longer than the wild side, being with game and fish and whatnot. I worked with a lot of high fences starting my career and all the way up until just a few years ago. And on those herds where we were, we could pretty well identify almost every deer within certain cases. When we got to 1-to-1 or even greater, 2-to-1, 2 bucks per doe or anything like that, we had such high mortality rate that I didn't prefer it. Now, we were looking at it from a future management because we're trying to grow 200-inch deer where we're trying to have a balanced herd, have a good rut, and kill good deer. But when we got to 1-to-1 or greater, our mortality would go up typically about 10%.
Okay. So
we wanted to back off to be below that. But there was also significant investment there that didn't want to be lost.
Sure. And it's also different than a free-ranging herd because you are still at the mercy of what your neighbors are doing. So if you're not controlling large acreages, thousands of acres,
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you can shoot for a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 or whatever. You may or may not achieve that.
Makes sense. That's good stuff, though. I like I'm glad that my initial thought there wasn't too far off. Every now and then I'm like, see how I line up with these guys, make sure I'm not way out there. So that was pretty good. Third one here, how to design locations for bow hunting when making food plots. I thought that was a very interesting question because not just in general setting up on travel corridors or something like that, but if you have not, I'm assuming, again, we're sort of projecting a little bit with this question to say that there is no food plot here. I plan on making one. All right, so what do I need to do and how do I need to set that up in order to be successful bow hunting? I've got my answer. I'll let you guys go first.
That's a lot of homework.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
You can't walk out through the woods and just go, I'm going to do it here.
That's right.
You can't.
There's so much homework behind that it's unbelievable. And I tell people, just like the conversation we had with Ernie up at his place in Tennessee, I'm not going to walk on a place doing a consult and in one day go, okay, put your food plot right here. Mm-hmm. And anybody that does is doing you a disservice. I know there's a ton of guys doing habitat maps and laying out food plot maps, and they're studying your aerial photos and they're placing fields based off of strictly an aerial. You need background information, where the deer are moving consistently, where have bucks been harvested before? Is that a consistent place those bucks are moving? Mm-hmm. What's your soil type? What's your slope? And things of that nature. So it is there's so many variables that have to come into play there. For me, that I think can be a multi-year process to depend on where the best place to place a successful bow hunting food plot.
Right, because I'm gonna tell you, I've had some fields that were absolutely superb. They looked great to me. They were in great locations, and yet daylight activity on them was none. Like they'd be full of deer at night, but during the day, no activity or very little activity. So I like to find areas where deer are already naturally going to be and get my food plot as close to that as I can. Or I tell people all the time, if you can place a food plot in very close proximity to thick cover, typically speaking, that's a good location. Now, you're going to do things a little bit differently depending on access and things like that. You can change that up. But I like to have my food very close by thick cover or areas that I know deer are traveling during the daylight hours or bedding in daylight hours. I don't want them to travel very far from where they're bedding to where they have to eat. Now, as far as the bow hunting aspect, I like irregularly shaped fields, narrow fields.
Okay.
Because if you've got a field that's 200 yards across,
sure,
and you're trying to shoot a 30 or 40 yard, area around you.
Hey, archery hunters can do that now.
Well, they can with crossbows, and they can shoot 100 easy. But
in a leg.
But
sorry.
Anyway, if you already have an area in mind, maybe neck that field down and have two sections. Neck it down where those deer are going to travel by you, within bow range.
Gotcha.
Yeah, if we're building them from scratch, most of the time our projects are involving logging, but we'll cut those fields out and we'll use either logging debris or field debris from stumping and create pinch points where otherwise there wouldn't be any there. We pile that stuff and force deer to do certain things. And in the past, we've actually built fences to push deer or funnel deer by a stand location.
Sure.
And you can take advantage of natural features like a blowdown. Let's say a tree blows down. Those deer are going to walk around that to come into the field.
Sure.
Just be advised, in about 5 years that blowdown is going to be gone.
Yep,
right.
That's true.
It's going to rot, so you may have to put you another top there.
Do something.
It's not permanent.
Nope, it's not permanent.
So here's my take. I would never, ever give anybody advice on what to plant, all that kind of stuff. That's not my wheelhouse. This is just me speaking from experience. I'm not as concerned about what you're planting and necessarily how, time period and what all that stuff looks like. My number one thing with planning a food plot, and he's talking about for bow hunting, is access. If you cannot slip into that plot
and out
easily, if you don't, preferably multiple access routes, multiple ways in and out of the same place based on the wind, based on what you're seeing on your cameras. You are shooting yourself in the foot, and you're not setting yourself up for success. I have hunted, again, just like you were talking about, a lush, beautiful, beautiful food plots that it's not that the deer don't use them necessarily. It's that I can't get in there without blowing them out.
Right.
And I can't get out, certainly, as it gets dark in the evenings. I definitely can't get out without blowing them out.
Come on up in here.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we got a
What's
visitor.
up? Yeah, we got a live audience.
Hey, Mason.
Off one.
How are you?
What's going on, man?
Take a seat over here, man.
But, I mean, access is just huge. And, again, if it's the most beautiful lush plot you've ever seen in your life, but you can't hunt it,
Well,
it's kind of defeating the purpose.
In reality, access is number one.
Yes,
Right. Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
You can have the best field there is. If you blow deer in and out of it, no good to you.
Right. So anyway, that would be my thought is wherever it is that you think you want a food plot to be, think about how you're going to access that and how you're going to, you know what I mean, based on your method of travel, you know what I mean, how you typically would get to it. If that's not feasible, it's not efficient, rethink that. We got
Yep. That's the first thing I look at when designing a new food plot. How are we going to access it?
Yeah.
And it needs to be a quiet way.
Absolutely. Because I personally hunt a very, very small piece of property in Marshall County that is exactly not what I'm talking about. It has one way in and one way out, and it's not that there's not deer there. There's a few, and there's some that are decent. But you can't get to it. You can't get to it without either blowing deer out on the way in or walking past where you hope the deer are going to come from later, which is just as bad because, as soon as they come out and catch your scent from where you've walked in, you're toast. You know what I mean? At that point, it's just, so I would say if I was building a food plot, especially for bow hunting where you've got to be preferably 30 yards and in, got to be able to access that thing.
Well, Matt and I have talked my little place close to here to death, and we think that that's one of the problems with a couple of locations is because we have such consistent photos of deer in daylight, and then when we're here to hunt, there's none. 2 days after, they're right back in there in daylight, that we've got to be walking by, these deer. But unfortunately, there is no other access to that place. Now, we're working on that, but we need some logging activity before we can rectify that.
Well, that's a good point too, though. Like these deer that you're getting on camera on any food plot, they're not. You say, man, I'm getting them at 7 o'clock at night, or I'm getting them at right after dark at 6 o'clock, whatever. Well, they're not 5 miles away. They're not far. They're just waiting on darkness.
They're inside half a mile.
Yes, they're
most of the time probably inside a quarter.
I was going to say I've got one food plot that is one of those that I was talking about that is beautiful, and I plant it every year, and it's full of deer at night. I can go over there and hunt on the food plot, morning or evening, doesn't matter, and see 1 to 5 deer. I can get 150 yards off of that food plot in any direction and see 25.
Yeah.
And you're not going to see those deer sitting in the shooting house overlooking the food plot. But if you get up above the cover that is adjacent to it, it's a highway of deer moving constantly all day long.
Well, it goes back to a very simple statement. Like deer are not generally stupid.
No.
They can pattern us just like we do them on occasion. So add or take away? Anything?
Good.
Pretty well got it. All right, number 4 here. I thought this was a very interesting question, too, because I actually don't have anything to add to this one. I would have to ask you guys. Number 4, how to improve/hunt land that is mostly wetland or swamp. Hunting it, I kind of have an idea, but how to improve wetland, I don't know where to really start there. I'd just
call Jeremy and list it.
Yeah,
sell it.
There you go.
There you go. Duck hole.
Absolutely.
I've got a lot. I don't have a whole lot to say on this, but I grew up hunting in the Sipsey Swamp between here and Tuscaloosa. Great area. I mean, it's just loaded with game, absolutely loaded with all kinds of game. You've got waterfowl and deer and turkeys and freshwater fishing. I mean, it's just great. But I wouldn't trade you 500 acres for 5 up here because of the water.
Really?
Yeah, it's just so much harder to hunt. You cannot access anything quietly.
That's true.
In the winter months, of course, that's our wet months, so there's water on everything. What you can do, and You can hunt travel corridors between slough beds or riverbanks, beaver dams, anywhere that deer don't have to be in the water. Now, I think they're part aquatic down there because they don't mind swimming.
They're used to it.
Yeah, they're used to it, but still, they'd prefer to stay on dry ground if they can. So, just use the terrain features to your advantage to kind of natural features to funnel deer, and that's where you need to be set up. If you can get on a beaver dam and have your on a day where the wind's blowing your scent across the slough or the pond or the dam or whatever, then you may catch deer moving back and forth. But we didn't kill the kind of deer in that bottomland as good as it was, and there's good deer down there and good numbers of deer, but we didn't kill the mature deer as consistently as we do in hill country. Yeah. I'd take hill country over bottom ground any day.
Absolutely.
Any day.
From a management standpoint and from an improvement standpoint, a lot of times you're real limited. I mean, number one, if you're going to do significant work, well, you got to do it with machinery, and you don't.
Machines and water don't go good together.
They don't go well. The one thing that we have had luck doing, and it's got to be dry enough to do it, is logging activity and being selective on the trees that you're taking, so that you're opening up. I mean, most time your swamps are closed canopy forest. So, or at least here. I know in other parts of the country, you've got all these bogs and whatnot that are fairly open. We don't have that much, unless it's been logged. But go in and we cut rows, just big open rows through big hardwood. Couple of places specifically that I can think of that we did that, and others we just did big seed tree cuts. So we'd cut everything and leave a handful of oaks out there to obviously to regenerate oak, because that's what we were after on those sites. But that opens up the forest floor. It gets a lot more growth. Now, obviously, it's going to turn into a hardwood jungle at some point, which is next to useless. I mean, because you've got 2,000 hardwood stems to the acre. I mean, you're not going to hunt that, any way, shape, or form.
I've seen some of that in action over in the Mississippi Delta, in both Mississippi and Arkansas. And we did a workshop with the NWTF when I worked over there. And, I mean, what they're able to accomplish as far as putting food and cover on the ground in those bottom and hardwood systems is amazing, and it can be done.
This is very expensive, or?
Well, what you do, like Jeremy was saying, is just either select cuts, where you're selecting either certain species of trees or certain classes of trees to remove, and you're wanting to leave your hard mass trees.
Or you can do
your desirable
clear cuts.
Yeah, or you can do clear cuts. But either way, what you're doing is just trying to open up that canopy and allow growth at the forest floor. Now, in an upland system, you're going to come back through and you're going to burn that every few years. You don't have that option in a bottomland system because they're much thinner barked trees. They're not accustomed to fire. They haven't adapted to fire, and you'll damage those trees.
They'll get rot at the base. I went and looked at a piece of property last week that was burned on a pretty heavy rotation that was hardwood, and we're about to have to go in and do a logging operation because all those trees are dying now. And it's a beautiful place, beautiful hardwood stand.
Is it bottomland hardwoods?
It's a mix. Bottomland and upland. They just, when you roll through a nice upland stand of hardwood that's red oak and white oak, with some long leaf mixed in, and there's 30-foot flame marks.
Can't do that.
No, hardwood trees don't handle that real well.
Tolerate that. Huh?
The longleaf pine looks great, but the hardwoods, they're smoked.
Yeah.
And we're gonna, matter of fact, our backs against the wall, getting them down before a mill's not gonna take them anymore.
Oh, really?
You got enough rot.
Oh, gotcha.
But yeah, I mean, removing trees from the canopy and getting food to the forest floor, hey, the swamp will grow unbelievable amount of forage.
Yes, it will.
But just you got to understand that once you do that, you're gonna be in a time period, 10, 15 years down the road, that you're gonna have a place that's pretty well unhuntable, and it's gonna be that way for a long period of time because it takes hardwood so long.
And it takes a lot of acreage to do this, because you can apply these principles to smaller acreages, and you won't have that diversity of having some part of your stand as open hardwoods and some part of it being, the thickets that you're after for browse and for bedding cover. And you can't sell that to a logger on smaller property. You've got to have a lot of acreage to do it, or it's not worth their effort.
Yeah,
right.
It's easier in the bottomland system with hardwood than it is pine. I mean, you can cut 10 or 20 acres of the right hardwood. If it's not the right hardwood, you can forget it.
Right.
But if it's the right hardwood, yeah, you can get 10, 20 acres cut. You call a logger down here and ask them to cut 20 acres of pine, they're just going to laugh at you. They got their pick of the jobs. They're not coming out for that.
Gotcha.
Nope, not happening.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was going to say I have had success hunting kind of swampy stuff. I mean, I've hunted stuff that was 4 inch everywhere that the eye could see was at least 4 inches standing water. One in particular around the Selma area, we're on this thing called a lodge. It's like a bow hunting tournament type thing. 2-person teams, there's 20 teams, and basically everything's done by weight. You harvest does and bucks too, and they'll give out daily prize for the biggest of the day, daily pot, and then for the whole weekend, all this kind of stuff. A lot of fun, but we went on one that was advertised as a rut hunt, me and my dad, and I got in the swamp that it was raining that morning, ended up having to wait until the rain broke somewhat, and said I want to be in the tree when the rain stops. And so we did. It finally stopped about 9 a.m. And as soon as it did, probably 10 minutes later, 3 does come. Like you said, you can't access this stuff. You can hear the deer coming when they're, before you ever see them too. So these 3 does come out, and thank the Lord, I made a shot, and it was by total accident. I'd forgotten my primary release, and I had to go to my backup, which is a wrist strap. My primary is a thumb, and that changes your draw length a good bit. And so, long story short, I end up pulling the shot way forward. Not what I was trying to do at all, but it almost cut its heart in half. And so, I mean, there's no blood trail, right? Because it's water everywhere. But the deer makes it 15 yards out of sight and dies. But you talk about challenging in terms of just trying to, I mean, I don't know how you would really scout that. If it hadn't been the rut, you know what I mean? It may have been a whole lot more difficult hunt there, but I was able to throw a rope around that thing's neck and float it, get it out, and we weighed it in. You have to weigh them in at noon on the last day, and I made it with 4 minutes to spare and got it weighed in, and ended up winning me like $900. So it was awesome.
Heck yeah.
It was awesome. But yeah, that stuff's very challenging. So I guess, yeah, that was more, I guess the question was from a habitat improvement standpoint, is there much you can do? So
that's about
it.
I mean, there's probably some guys with some clever ideas out there. But if I'm looking to make a big impact, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a big impact over a lot of acres.
So to use a political term here, is there a way to drain the swamp, so to speak? Like, is there a way to
Sure.
I mean, can you do that?
In certain places, absolutely. But you run afoul of environmental law pretty quickly there, depending on where you are, acres and, maps. You're going to have to go through Corps engineers and things like that. But hey, look out in these ag fields down South Alabama. There's been many swamps that's been put a drainage ditch through and the hardwood slicked off, and they're planting it in corn and soybeans. So yes, there are times that you can do things like that, but you've got to make real sure of where you're at and to make sure there are no plants that are going to be negatively affected, that are threatened and endangered.
I got you.
You can still convert things, but generally, you know how this world works. You got to ask you got to ask for permission, because if you go in afterwards and ask for forgiveness, generally you get a big hefty fine.
Yeah, that's true. Don't want to go messing with the government on that kind of stuff. So that's good stuff too, man. We'll just keep right on trucking along here. Another one, man. I keep saying every question's good, but I like almost all of these, because I love to hear what you guys have to say here. Which do you prefer, making plots or good food trees like chestnuts and persimmons? which would you, if you had your choice, I guess, on a particular land, would you rather
a food plot?
Yeah, would you rather plant a food plot, or would you rather plant and put your? I guess again, I'm projecting, but same amount of money. Like I've got a limited budget, and I can either go build a food plot with it, or I can buy trees.
That's an easy one.
I mean, it's like again, that may not be what they were asking, but I'm just trying to take it as like, which do you prefer, making plots or good food trees like chestnuts and persimmons?
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I'm going to go with the plots because I can put more food out over a longer period of time. But that's just the quick and the short of it to me. Now, if you've got a food plot that's too small that you can't produce anything in it, then that's different. I would want to understand, some other factors about a particular location.
Sure.
But if it's just, can I plant a plot or plant a bunch of trees, I'm going to go with the plot.
Okay.
It depends. So my answer is it depends on what is the most limiting factor
you've
there.
Got to pick.
Okay, I'm fixing to pick. So if wildlife openings or natural openings are limited on that property, I'm going with the openings every time.
He's still dodging.
Shut up. If they already have.
Now, when you say wildlife openings, what do you mean by that?
I'm just saying like open ground that I have the option of planting. So like I'm not a big proponent of planting every acre you have available.
Yeah. Sure.
So but if you have that option, if you've got wildlife openings there, and that's not a limiting factor, then I'm going to take advantage of some of those openings and plant hard mass trees or soft mass trees. But I guess I agree more with Jeremy. I'd rather take the acreage and put it in food plots that I can do something with
year round.
Here's a good one. What?
What would you rather do on a?
You're fixing to hit my camera.
Am I?
Yeah.
Well, I told you not to put it so close.
Well, don't rock as much.
If it's fired up.
Yeah, I know.
If you were on a big tract, large acreage, primarily hardwood, a lot of mass production, and you've got 5+% acreage in food plots, what do you do?
I mean, that's my target.
Mm-hmm.
So
I know. So what do you do then?
Make them bigger. If a hard mast is already out there, then I may throw some soft mass producers around the edge of some of those food plots. But acreage is,
planting sawtooths in a hardwood forest is kind of like peeing in the ocean.
Well,
that's right.
But no, that's kind of. I know he didn't reference sawtooth specifically, but I'm just saying like from harvesting deer perspective, I have been much more successful hunting over acorns, and persimmons and stuff like
acorns,
that.
It's all about the acorns. Now, I will say this, since you bring it up.
Yes.
If I'm in a sea of pine trees and I think I'll live long enough to hunt over those acorns, then I want to plant some acorns.
Yeah, that's another thing, too. I guess you're talking about, like, food plot is, an immediate return.
It is.
You're going to be able to see and hunt over something within a few months versus trees. You're talking years and years. And like you said, hey, if I even live long enough to get to hunt over them? So it's another thing to consider.
Like for me over here on my place, if I could knock a 10-acre hole out in the pine stand, I'm going to plant clover or soybean, something like that.
And he would wear deer slap out if he could do that.
Even though hardwoods are limited to me over there, I've still got enough to go bow hunt and be successful.
But see, his hardwoods are inaccessible. A lot of them
They're
are
tough.
Because you got to drop that into the ravines to get there, and your wind is just
I start saying they're there, they're just not huntable.
Right. Access again.
Well, you could make access and be fine, but like he said, because of the topography, you're never going to have a consistent wind where you're going to get a mature deer inside of 30 yards. They're going to smell you every single time.
Right. I got you.
You can shoot them down in there with a rifle.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a little different game with archery stuff. But yeah, I just think that was interesting because early season, everybody gets all fired up about hunting over white oaks and persimmons and all that kind of stuff.
Hey, I'm exactly the same way.
Sure.
I mean, I've got a order with Alan down at they're the wildlife group. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I can't even remember if they're company or group, but down there at Tuskegee, we're about to plant a bunch of hardwood or hard mast and soft mast trees on a couple pieces of property. But it's a 500-acre property with 45 or 50 acres of green fields.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really need any more green.
No, that's a lot for that sample size, I guess you're talking about. So, yeah, well, that's cool. That's pretty straightforward there. We've kind of touched on this one already, but we'll, I guess, kind of go a little bit deeper here. Is thoughts on permanent stands or shooting houses on food plots specifically? Do you feel like that's a good idea? Do you do it? Do you not do it? Or is that something that people need to be mindful of?
Are we going to answer every question with "it depends"?
It depends.
Because it does. It depends.
It depends.
We're all getting older. That could be a sponsor for the podcast.
Yeah.
Depends.
Depends.
Golly,
he went there.
He did. After the 3 weeks of stomach virus that went through all three families.
Gosh, man. We don't have to talk about it anymore.
I prefer permanent stands that you can limit the amount of scent that's getting out of on big fields or on food plots, but they've got to be in the right place, and you've got to be able to get in and out without boogering deer.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't get in and out without boogering deer, and it's just the old typical shooting house with window holes cut in it,
sitting right on the edge of the food plot.
Right on. Yep. Right. Hey, I love you to death. I got a client that's got a 5-acre field, and luckily it's a redneck blind, but it's sitting in the center of the field.
Nice. And I see them do that in the Midwest all the time. You couldn't do that down here. You can't do that down here.
His property has so little human interaction as far as hunting goes, and they ride it all the time, that they see deer every time they go. But they ride 2 or 3 rangers around every single day, unless it's just pouring down, and then they get in the cab ranger and ride some. But nice. They still see deer sitting in a shooting house in the middle of the field, and killed mature bucks that way.
It all depends on
what. It's just not pressure.
It's right, pressure. Pressure has everything to do with it, because I've got shooting houses now on the majority of our food plots, or off the edge, that we can access pretty easily. But they may only get hunted once or twice a year. So if I spook deer once or twice a year, it doesn't matter. What I usually try to do is wait until the time's right. I know a good deer's showing up, and
go in there and shoot
just
once.
go in there and shoot him and be done.
Yeah.
But we should have some footage. Most of my footage is fairly useless because I don't ever kill anything.
That's a fact.
But I've got a lot of footage of a couple of little shooting houses that I'm sitting in that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's just a little old shooting house with window holes knocked in the side. I am hunting them on the right wind. But in both of them, I can walk to the shooting house, get in it with deer standing there, and they never know.
They never have a clue.
I can get in and out without being noticed. Now, if you go in there in the wrong wind, you're done.
Right.
But there again, it depends.
It depends.
Yeah, well, and I think that he was specifically about like permanent, shooting houses or blinds or something like that, as opposed to like lock-ons or something like that. Now, because
I've got ladder stands that on the edge of some food plots, and if I'm bow hunting, honestly, on a food plot, if I'm bow hunting, I like to have the option of a climber or a saddle or something I can just go throw up real quick and hunt, depending on the wind's direction and all.
For sure, man. It's one of those things. It's not that I didn't pay attention to the wind or anything. I always have. I feel like, especially in my adult life, but having something that allows you to go, I know what the forecast calls for, and then you get there and go, well, that's not right, and have the ability to just make a move and it not be a big deal. Like, man, it's really nice to be able to do that. And
those guys in the Midwest have no idea how lucky they are to have consistent wind.
Yeah. Yeah, here it's a whirlwind out here. It swirls and all the time.
I know everybody's got some topography, but we seem to never know what our wind's going to do.
And it changes. And what I've seen, a lot of times if the wind, I've got one stand, it's actually right over here. On the absolute best wind that you need to hunt the stand, you can't hunt it. because it comes down through there and it seems like it's blowing.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, but it hits a terrain feature and swirls it back around and it blows right down the other side of the field. And I've witnessed it. Like you can watch the leaves fall in November, and the leaves on this side of the field are coming down and they're falling this way and it looks so pretty, and then on the other side of the field they're falling that way. So I can sit in that shooting house and everything that walks in the field smells me even though the wind's hitting me in my face. So I have to wait on the wrong wind because it doesn't hit that same terrain feature, and it's the dangest thing I've ever seen.
Sometimes the wrong wind's the right wind.
Yes,
it really is. And I started paying more attention to it several years ago when I got into long range shooting with some buddies, and figuring out that, hey, the wind right here isn't the same wind that's down there 200 yards.
Exactly.
Even on flat ground.
Yep.
Open flat ground, it may not be the same.
Your bullet's hitting different wind directions as it goes down through there. A lot of different wind columns.
So I haven't here because all our fields are small and I'm relatively close, things like that. But place I used to hunt, a big property with big fields, I had flags tied up so I could see. There's no way to know what it's doing over there. But if I started seeing things that were looking like wind was changing and going to cause me a problem with them smelling me, not shooting, just get up and leave.
Yeah.
I mean, if the wind gets wrong and you're already there, you still need to get your butt up and leave.
Yep. I've had to before. I've had deer blow at me and then blow at me again and go, okay, I'm not doing any good here. I might as well leave. Like, this is.
And a lot of people just sit there and stick it out. They're like, I'm here. Well, they're not smelling me because that's not what the wind's doing today. It may be.
They're blowing at something.
Yeah.
I had deer behind the house when I killed that last doe. What is today? It was on the 16th. Every single deer I saw, every deer came out and looked straight at that shooting house and blew or stomped or did all of the above and would run out of the field and come back, and they're looking, and I'm like, one, I haven't moved. I know they can't see me. I'm concealed, but something is awry. Something's not right. Nobody's even hunted in this shooting house. So they were smelling me. I have no doubt in my mind. I don't know what the wind was hitting me in my face. I don't know what it was doing, but they were smelling me because they'd come out and they'd frolic around and do their deer things. And all of a sudden, it's like everybody in the field just all at the same time, like, uh-oh, we just hit something we don't like. This ain't right. And they'd all do that. And finally, I shot the doe before she had a chance to make it out of the field.
That's right.
Shoot them.
That's right.
I'll tell you one of the neat things that social media and podcasts and stuff has brought to the forefront is different ways people combat that, or what people use to do a lot of different things. But wind was one. My father-in-law had done it for years, so I grew up doing it, hunting for several years, but I had never seen anybody in the mainstream really do much of it till the guys, the hunting public, had the little pouch with the milkweed.
Yep.
Man, I've been doing that since the early 90s when I started hunting.
Right.
And my father-in-law had it looked like a little can of snuff. I guess it was mass produced back then, but it had a little milkweed seed and had just a little hole in the center of it. And you could reach down in there and pull them up and drop them off, and the lid would slide. It just had a little notch in it to slide shut.
Yeah.
But I hadn't seen anybody doing that in years until they did.
Yeah.
But something that you can put in the wind column and watch.
Yep.
I highly recommend having that.
I've even seen, I can't remember the name of the company, but they did make, it's like, it's vapor, and you just hit a little puff of that little vapor and watch it do its thing in the wind column and stuff.
That's great.
But, I mean, I understand.
It dissipates.
Sure.
Right. I want to watch
quick.
it for a while.
Right.
I want to see what it does for a while.
The little puff bottles it's got, I'm guessing, what was that, baby
powder,
powder, cornstarch, something like that.
Yeah.
You just puff it and you can see it, but it dissipates once it gets, really 10, 15 yards from you. You can't see it much. But if you can see that thing floating way out there, if you got good eyes, I don't have good eyes anymore. I mean, you can see that stuff for 100 yards if you're really paying attention and watching, or turn 2 or 3 loose so you can kind of follow them.
For sure.
It's amazing what the wind does.
Yeah, it does crazy stuff, for sure.
Absolutely.
Let's see, number 7 here. Next to last question is thoughts on blind calling and what times to use your call. I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit during the rut episode, and basically all of us pretty much agree, just don't do it in the South.
Yeah, I don't really blind call down here much. I gave up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've like I said before, I've rattled in one deer in my lifetime in Alabama, and I had to shoot him because that was I can't believe that worked. Had to shoot him. So.
I'm going to pull back on that a little bit because I've hunted a lot in some other southeastern states. I had it work fairly well in Tennessee, you know, through the years. We used to hunt a place on the Mississippi River south of Vicksburg. It worked fairly well over there. Now here, no, especially not on this place that's close. It's got so many members next to us in the club. Golly, you can hear them all over the place. Public land, if you get close enough. But the little can, yeah. I mean, it makes the same noise every time you turn it over. How many times do you think a deer hears that in its lifetime?
Right.
I mean, hundreds.
Yeah.
I'm sure around here with
a lot.
The number of hunters that's in the woods, public land and private.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I could tell easily when I was in Kansas this year. There was a guy that walked by me one morning. He never knew I was there. I had one guy walk 45 yards in front of me and one guy 12 yards behind me. And they both went the same way. They got down there, and about 30 minutes later, I heard one guy, he got his rattle bag out, and they don't even sound like antlers. Like it just sounds like you beating sticks together.
Beating plastic.
It sounded awful.
Which is what you're doing.
Right, exactly. And then he would, and I just got down and left. I'm like, this is just ridiculous. So, if I can tell the difference,
yeah,
I guarantee you deer can tell the difference.
For sure.
You've got to catch a deer in the southeast amped up out of his mind.
Yes.
In my opinion, to respond to that type calling.
Mm-hmm.
What I have had luck with in the southeast is rattling, with actual antlers, and had better luck with it on the ground than in the tree. But I can think back to 2 or 3 deer that I rattled in. I mean, to the tree I was sitting in Tennessee, and it's not quote unquote blind calling because I could see the deer, but my gosh, hundreds of yards away, he don't hear me yet, but he's moving this way, and as soon as he, 2 of them for sure, because I watched them for so long, they just caught a little bit of that noise, and they, it just piqued their interest just enough to turn them and come my way instead of the way they were walking. And then you can throw something else at them that's a little quiet just to keep their interest. A lot of times they'll come in. But just that being in the woods and just banging things together and blowing on those calls loud, no, because you can't see 50 yards. You hit one of those grunt calls that sounds like you're blowing in a bullhorn.
Yeah, I know.
Deer going the other way, in my opinion.
Want something that sounds like a T-Rex walking through the woods or something. I mean, it just don't work. And like I said before, that little small arrowhead call that I've got is the only thing I've ever grunted one in, and I saw it before I ever did. My buddy Jake grunted it first, and he came in to about 45 yards or so and kind of lost interest and started to go away. Jake grunts again, doesn't pay him any attention. I grab mine out, grunt, and he's at 60 yards and turns around and busts through briars, he was on a string coming straight to us. And then as soon as, we still don't get a shot, deer kind of sort of spooks and goes off down to the bottom again. Jake grunts, I grunt, he don't care. He's leaving. We're both, finally I said, hey Jake, have you got a bleat on your call? And he was like, yeah. And I said, well, just bleat at it. Like just throw something at it that it hasn't heard yet. And so he does. And here it comes, just in a whirl. It comes around behind us, and we end up not getting a shot at it, but came in our direction 3 different times. You know what I mean? But that is by far, that is the only success story I have. You know what I mean? Nothing else.
Right, and I'm not going to say it don't work.
No, I wouldn't say it doesn't
work for some
work.
people, but it doesn't seem to be a consistent way of successful hunting in the South. It depends. That's right.
That's the next T-shirt.
It depends.
And it depends on what state of mind you catch that deer in.
That's true.
They can be amped up, and I think you could call them in with a bucket and a wood spoon.
Yeah,
right.
But you catch them in the wrong frame of mind, and there's not anything you can do to get them to come in. And I have had 2 instances in the South where I've heard a buck roar. Our buddy Cody.
I have too.
Asked, he said, "Have y'all ever heard a buck do that?" And we're like, "Well, yeah, and so have you." He's like, "Yeah, but I hadn't heard it here."
Right.
He's like, I heard it here, and I'm like, okay, well.
That is kind of funny because we have those conversations often with people, like, snort wheezing and buck roars and all these things that Midwest hunters are used to those vocalizations. You don't hear a lot of that here.
Not much.
No.
Mm-mm.
I've heard 3 snort wheezes, I think, in my whole life here in Alabama.
I have heard, and I wouldn't have known that it was an actual deer if I hadn't saw it. Like, wasn't watching it when it happened, but I've heard a couple fawns bleat for their mom, like to kind of get a little too far away from mom, whatever. I've heard that a couple times. That's it. I've never, about it. All right. Very last question here. Again, I'm going to sort of project on this a little, but this is the quote. Any better land management than what's natural? I'm assuming that means, is there any better land? I'm assuming it's probably related to nutrition, probably.
Well, I think I know what it could mean. One of 2 things. You could interpret that. Is there anything better than just letting the environment do what the environment does?
Yes, I think that's kind of
being in a natural state.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, man's been manipulating the environment ever since the first 2 humans were on this earth.
Yeah, it's you can always accentuate or improve what Mother Nature's giving you, but now I don't think you're going to do any better than keeping natives at the forefront of that.
Right.
Now there's some times where you're going to want to plant a food plot that your native vegetation is not going to do exactly what you're after at that particular time for that particular reason. But most of the time, 99.9% of the time, keeping natives at the forefront is what you should do.
Habitat first.
Habitat first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think, again, a little bit of a projection, but I'm going to say if you're talking about, like, would I rather my property have native vegetation, native growth for them to eat, or should I go fill up a bunch of protein feeders and put those out for
native.
them?
Go native.
Go native, right?
Yeah.
But and we've actually had several people reach out on Instagram specifically and say, does that hurt anything? Is it bad to put protein feeders out? And I'm like, it doesn't hurt anything, I don't think, but if that's all you got and you don't have the habitat to support it, and you're putting all your eggs in the basket of the protein pellets, you're going to be really disappointed in your results.
If I had to choose one or the other, I'm going to put my money behind figuring out how I can do management on my ground to promote natives versus planting food plots and filling feeders.
Yes, all day. And all the studies back that up.
Yep.
If you can improve habitat, that is what can change a deer herd versus, it's called supplemental feeding because it is just that. It is a supplement to what's already there. And, if you go all the way back to Harry Jacobson's study from MSU years and years ago, I think that the best gains that they saw out of a wild deer herd with supplemental feed was 1.5%, 2% gain? 2% high?
No, I think it was right around
2%. So, you're looking at
it wasn't very good.
Body mass increases and antler increases of 2%. To me, the amount of money you're spending on supplemental feed is not worth that.
That's a lot of money,
now,
especially if you do it the way that people recommend doing it.
Right, and enclosure.
If you're managing well,
right.
Even if you are managing really well and then throw supplemental feeding on top, the percent gain is still low.
Right.
It's still really low, but that may be the last step that you need to take to get to where you're trying to get.
Right.
Now, you flip that and you add supplemental feed to high deer densities in enclosures, and it can make substantial gains.
Big difference.
Huge difference, because those deer typically don't have as much availability in native habitat, native browse.
And there's plenty of research out there. You mentioned putting, feeders out, around if it's in good habitat or bad. But the research has shown that when you put the feeders out, deer are getting, quite a bit of what they need there, especially in an enclosed situation. But they will start selecting the highest quality food that they've got naturally and can actually degrade your habitat further by selecting for that, and then those plants not being able to reproduce or not being able to reproduce in the volume that they need to continue to be successful. And over time,
the scrub stuff starts to grow.
Yeah, they can degrade the habitat, and you lose out on a really good and viable plant composition or community that you need, to grow your deer.
Gotcha.
So that supplemental feeding can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Depending on if you're doing other things correctly.
Well, I think most people, I think most people just want to feel like I'm doing something proactive. Like I'm doing something to try to help. And even if I might not, in their minds, like I can't pay someone to come in here and do a full consult and a full management plan, but well, I can spend some money on some feed. I can throw some, I can fill up some feeders out there, and it's like, well,
I'll go get me a trophy rock and a bag of trace mineral salt, and I've done something.
Exactly, and it's like, well, hey, look, teach his own. But
and I don't want to hurt I'm going to hurt feelings when I tell you this. You're not doing anything other than putting an attractant out there by putting out the trophy rocks and all the minerals and stuff. You're not helping the deer. I mean, yes, they come to it. Yes, they use it. But you're not adding body weight. You're not adding anything.
The vast majority from the plants.
Exactly. If you look at, and I said this on Michael Perry's podcast, if you'll just take a look at how many hours out of the day deer are spending at your feed sites or mineral licks versus munching around on native vegetation, it is a very small percentage.
Well, they get 80 to 85% of their nutrition outside of anything that a human's doing. Plain and simple.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's good. The last part of that little question there was like, I'd love to hear you guys discuss with Kyle from Native Habitat Project. So, we
can reach out to Kyle.
Yeah, we may have to do that. I think we're both going to be in NWTF or something. We may hook up there or something like that. But that's pretty much it. That's the viewer request segment. If we didn't answer your question, it's because you didn't send one in, because that was we got several. But we'll probably do some more of this in the future. I really enjoyed these types of episodes because it's what you guys seem to care about, and that's kind of what we're here for. So you guys stay tuned. I guess the next time you'll hear from us, hopefully, will be at NWTF the 15th. Is that when we're going up?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, February 15th.
I think I'll get there on the 14th to get set up, and then y'all come in a day or two after that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'll see you guys up there. Stop by. We're not totally sure yet. We might have some merch up there. I don't even know if you guys want any merch for Southern U on it. Acorns. or any of that kind of stuff. It depends. Yeah, we may have that on there too. That'd be a great shirt, by the way. Would be. We'll have some stuff up there. Come say hi. At least, we
tell us we're idiots.
Yeah, tell us how stupid we are.
That's fine. We can handle it.
Yeah, we can. We're big boys. Most of us.
I'm not that big.
That's not. But we appreciate you guys listening, and we look forward to meeting you guys out there at NWTF. And if you guys have any questions or concerns, you can definitely message us through Instagram or Facebook. You can also reach us. I don't say this enough, but email is info@thesouthernu.com. You can send stuff, requests that way too. But hopefully, we say this a lot, it's not just a hunting podcast. We've talked hunting a lot here lately because that's the season we're in. But very shortly, as deer season in the South kind of comes to a close, we're going to switch gears and really start doing more. We'll talk turkeys, of course, but we're going to switch and really talk more habitat and land improvement, management, that sort of stuff. And hopefully we'll have some more digital content on YouTube stuff to show you on that for prescribed burns and site preps and all kinds of cool stuff too. So hang in there. We're going to make it happen. All right. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time.